What's behind recurrent sexual violence in India? The rape and murder of a junior doctor has set off angry protests across the country. Women are calling for better safety measures. So what can be done to stop such sex crimes? This is Inside Story. Hello again, I'm James Bays. The rape and murder of a junior doctor has led to widespread outrage across India, reigniting debates over violence against women. The 31-year-old was attacked earlier this month while she was resting during a 36-hour shift in a state-run hospital in West Bengal. Protests calling for justice and safety have gone on for weeks, and now political rivalries are also playing a role in the unrest. The case is highlighting gender-based violence, punishment and women's welfare in India. So, with the country's top court now involved, will new measures end the outrage? And can underlying social issues be adequately addressed through legislation? We'll explore all these issues with our guests in a moment, but first this report from Katia Lopez-Hodayan.
These protesters want the top elected official in India's West Bengal state to step down. They say Moumita Banerjee is mishandling a case involving the rape and murder of a female doctor in the eastern city of Kolkata.
This is our demand, and that's why we came here today. If the state's chief minister does not resign, the culprits of the crime will not be found or punished. The people of West Bengal won't be able to live in peace.
The crime has led to outrage across India, and it's also fueling rivalries among political parties. Supporters of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's BJP government have held their own protest, accusing the Trinamool Congress Party of mismanaging the investigation. The state chief minister disagrees and says justice will be served.
Next Friday, September 6th, we will demand the guilty face capital punishment. Students will take to the streets to call for this. I would like to request my supporters to stand by the cause.
The attack on August 9th has led to widespread protest, with medical staff organizing strikes and calling for justice for their 31-year-old colleague who was murdered in a state-run hospital. Justice! She was reportedly attacked while resting after finishing a 36-hour shift. At least one person has been arrested, but protesters say more people were involved and should be charged.
The ongoing protests are needed since people do not have safety anywhere, and every family includes a woman.
Activists say lessons are not being learned. It's been 12 years since the gang rape of a young woman on a bus in New Delhi sparked mass protest. The attack led to stricter punishment for rape. Despite tougher laws, women continue to face high levels of sexual violence. And India is consistently ranked among the worst places in the world to be a woman.
I think the problem is social. I think as a society, we're a deeply patriarchal society. We haven't got used to the fact that women work in large numbers.
India's highest court has set up a task force of doctors to look into measures to improve safety at work. A final report is expected in about 2 months. Until then, more protests are expected, as the rape and murder of a 31-year-old woman horrifies a nation and sparks debates reaching far beyond politics. Katia Lopez-Hodayan, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, let's discuss this further with our panel of guests who are joining us here today. In New Delhi, Ranjana Kumari is the director of the Centre for Social Research and a prolific author on women's issues, including the book Gender, Work and Power Relations. In Kolkata, Juma Sen is an advocate in the High Court there who's represented survivors of domestic and sexual violence. In Bengaluru, Amrita Dutta is the national editor at scroll.in news website and a veteran journalist. If I can start at the beginning of this story, and it is a horrific crime, August the 9th, a junior doctor, age 31, found in the seminar hall of the teaching hospital where she was working. Clearly, horrific crime, a woman being murdered in that way, but the fact that it was in a hospital where she was resting after a 36-hour shift, I think makes it even more disturbing. If I can start with you, Ranjana, nearly 3 weeks on, protests are continuing. Give us an idea of the scale of the reaction to this crime.
Well, David, this is one of the most troubling rape and murder case which has come in recent times. Not that we haven't had in 2012 a girl who was raped and murdered in a moving bus in Delhi, and the whole country was protesting. Even in the villages, we had the protest. We personally, I myself with my group, were at India Gate for 4 nights in that winter. And then, of course, a committee was constituted and we got a law which is very stringent and which also increased the quantum of punishment. And then we were hoping, and then, of course, all the 4 rapists were hanged. And we were hoping that things will become a little bit more normalized. But then this has shaken us all beyond belief, because the way the body of this doctor was smothered, her eyes were punched, her lips were cut, and both the legs were pulled apart so that her pelvic bone broke. And that's how she was killed. And also she was in her working space, a doctor, and she was in the conference room of the hospital. After all these hours of work, she was resting, as you rightly said. And then this person comes in, and a person comes in. So far, we don't know. Central Bureau of Intelligence is investigating the case because there was a lot of watch-up by the local authorities, by the local police. They registered FIR quite late, and also that the central government really transferred the head of that institution and posted him even in a better posting. So everybody started doubting the intent of the local government, and then protests broke out all over the country. Doctors protested. We had the protest where, women's groups and organizations, everybody, and also, of course, political groups took advantage of it, and they also protested across the country. Now, this case still is being investigated. Then Supreme Court walks in, the Supreme Court of India. And of course, they took the suo moto, cognizance of this offense. And they constituted a committee, and they asked, of course, state government to start reporting and Central Bureau of Intelligence to report to the Supreme Court. So this whole process is going on.
We'll come to those stages of the investigation in a bit. But I would like to talk about the 31-year-old doctor, the woman who died at the centre of this. Now, Indian law says we cannot name her, but there are details that have emerged from her family about her. She was finalising her wedding. She was going to specialise in respiratory medicine, having witnessed patients gasping for breath when she'd worked during COVID. She lived with her parents, but they were clearly very proud of her because on the brass nameplate on the door of the house, it had her name, not theirs, with the word doctor in front of it. Her father runs a tailoring business, suffering high blood pressure, we're told. And reporters heard that her last words to her mother were, "Please make sure Dad takes his medicine on time. Don't worry about me." Amrita, this is someone who could have gone on to have done so much good.
Right, of course. And there's sort of great sadness, I think, everybody feels, especially the women who've come out on the streets. But, I'd also like to point out that as tragic as this death is, there is a tendency there is a problem in the way episodic outrage against rape has sort of happened in this country. And I would say that's also part of the problem. There is no taking away from the loss of this human life. But there are women, the figures for India are quite stark. There are about, according to the National Crime Bureau, there are about 86 cases of rape a day. So I think the question we also need to ask is who is a woman whose violation matters to Indians? Why do we see systemic rape go unnoticed, uncovered by media, by unnoticed by politicians? And who is it that sort of evokes our collective conscience? And in this case, I would say as a journalist, one of the most disturbing aspects in this case was the focus, the lurid focus on the injuries of this woman. Why do we need sort of rape to be this brutal and violent for us to, be out on the streets? And
it's worth adding, isn't it, Amrita, that those details have not been officially released. They are details that the journalists have got from leaks. Juma, you are there in Kolkata. Let me ask you about the early stages of this investigation, because it seemed to go very slowly to begin with. There is now a suspect who is in custody, and we understand that he's a police volunteer. That, I think, made people suspicious. Where you are as a lawyer in the Kolkata High Court, do people believe there was a deliberate cover-up? Do they believe the police have acted in the early days in the way they should have done?
Well, I think that's a very important question, and at the heart of these entire this confusion, this cacophony that has emerged, what comes out very strongly is the question of institutional accountability or a lack thereof. And if we look at the investigation, the manner in which the investigation had taken place, and I need to add a caveat here that I am representing one of the parties before both the High Court and the Supreme Court in this matter, so I cannot go a lot into the investigation, largely also because the investigation, the nitty-gritties about the investigation are not part of the public domain. Whatever is coming out through leaks in the media. But what comes out very strongly from the media reportage, as well as some of this reportage has also been this have been taken from the court proceedings. What comes out very strongly is that there has been a complete institutional failure on two counts. The first count is the institutional failure by the RGCO, the medical institution itself, in the manner in which it failed to prevent such an act from taking place. And I need to add here that this is not the first time that such a gruesome act of rape and murder has happened. There's a long history to it. In fact, our workplace harassment law, which is the protection of there's the protection and prohibition of and redressal, the sexual harassment law, which is a 2013 act. It came in the aftermath of Nirbhaya, but it was the history of that act actually goes far back. In 1992, there was again a gang rape of a woman and a Dalit woman, and this happened in the course of her work, and the workplace failed to protect her, and women's groups went to the Supreme Court and got what is known as the Vishakha guidelines. So this was an elaborate set of guidelines to prevent, not only to redress acts of sexual harassment, and I use sexual harassment as a spectrum of all kinds of gender-based harassment that women often face in the workplace. So the Vishakha guidelines came into effect not just as a matter of redressal, but also to protect and prevent and prohibit from such harassments from taking place, to ensure that a woman is able to access her workplace with the kind of dignity that she deserves. And,
Juma, I'd like to ask you another question as our lawyer in Kolkata. The case now, the investigation, has been taken over by the federal authorities. The Central Bureau of Investigation and India's Supreme Court is involved. How unusual is that, and does it give you more hope?
Well, I think the Central Bureau of Investigation, it is not very common for Central Bureau of Investigation to be handed over a case because law and order is very much, which includes investigation, is very much what is known as a state subject. So the state authorities, they have more control over it. It is only in certain cases, in very rare exceptional cases, that I do not want to go into the legalese, but only in very exceptional cases, rare cases, such investigations are handed over to the CBI, the Central Bureau of Investigation. And this is not the first time this has happened, and nor is this going to be the last time. But what is, as far as your question, whether we should be hopeful or not, I think it's too early to say whether we are going to be hopeful or whether if this is going to be an act of dejection for all of us.
Okay, let me bring in Ranjana on this point, because the Supreme Court, as I said, is also involved. They've already set up what they call a hospital safety task group, a national task force of doctors to make recommendations. I mean, is that a good measure with regard to this case before we look at the wider problem?
Well, certainly, David. I think this is also, one of the issues which are pending in Parliament is a law which doctors had proposed. And it is the safety of doctors, because beating up the doctor, in the OPD or in the departments or in ICU when something goes wrong with the patient is become a commonplace thing. Almost 75% doctors in one of the studies, not India, but in international study came out that they faced some or the other kind of violence. So then the doctors proposed this bill. Bill is pending in the Parliament. Doctors have met the health minister, the President of India, and since I'm in touch with some of their groups, they have been asking all the advocates for women's rights to push for this bill that they should bring in. So hopefully when they go through all these investigations, I only wish the Supreme Court should have involved the women's groups and organizations in task force and have other groups which are daily, day in and night, working on these issues and fighting back in terms of what is happening by the judiciary, what is happening by the police, because it takes a week, more than a week, to file a first information report. Now, that's the police duty to do it. Anyway, so I wish that this report, this whole task force will come up with the more concrete measures. If you take work from a person in any work premises for 38 hours, 42 hours, then it is criminal negligence on the part of the institution to not provide the safety that they were supposed to provide, or not provide a place at least to rest. I mean, this doctor is resting in a conference room. Unthinkable. So I think these are the things they will come up with. I'm sure the committee will go through all the crises and problems that the medical fraternity is facing, and especially young doctors are facing, young women doctors are facing in the country. I think that's something which will come up, and I'm sure Supreme Court will do it. But just to go back to your question, David, about what is the hope? I think, if you look at the reality of India in terms of this whole misogynistic culture and, the way women are being exploited sexually in workplace, and the entitlement with the men. This is something which has led to a lot more cases. And mind you, this girl had complained earlier. That's what we heard. And as you were saying, that a lot of news traveled because of the gap between the incidents and the action of the government and official information release in the open space. None of us know what is true, what is not true, because so much came through misinformation, deep fake, so many issues. I mean, even to the extent that they talked about 150 grams of semen in her vagina. I mean, like, what kind of information was that? And then media started building stories around that. In news channels, you started hearing how many men must have been there, and all kinds of issues started coming up. So, this is where I think accountability has to be fixed. And this is where the state government missed the whole thing. And then it is High Court of Bengal which really asked for CBI to investigate this case. It is not that the Central Bureau of Investigation went and asked for this case. It is High Court of Bengal which really said that, local police is not doing a good job, and let this. And Supreme Court of India has asked many questions to local police on their investigation and their methodology. So okay. I hope that with all this, something will come out. And
you're talking here about how we don't know many of the details. Amrita, if we look at the bigger situation across India, again, I don't think we know many of the details, do we? I mean, I don't like to make generalisations, particularly when we're dealing with the most populous country on earth, but it seems sexual violence is a major problem. You look at the statistics, the latest ones we have are 2022. Police recorded 31,516 reports of rape. That's about 86 rapes a day. Do you think those figures are accurate or are they an undercount?
From what we've heard from our reportage or from women activists, given the fact that rape is a crime that's very difficult to report on two levels, women are reluctant to come forward and go to a police station because of the questions that will be asked. There is also social stigma attached to being a rape victim. So I would say that those figures might be an undercount. And so, I think that's also what's come up. I would say again that we tend to think of rape as an emergency, as something that happens, in exceptional circumstances, whereas it is a more systemic, more endemic thing in India. And we do not respond adequately to that continuum and that spectrum of violence. And as many feminists would have pointed out, rape is only only in one end of a spectrum of violence that women face. And one of the very interesting things that came out in the reporting of this case was that the man accused, who was a civic volunteer with the Calcutta police, so there were older complaints against him of domestic violence, and they were made by his wife, who had gone to the police twice, saying that he had assaulted her. Now, how when our systems do not continue to silence women who come up with complaints of domestic violence, how there is a link between that and bigger so-called bigger crimes. So I think we need to see this link and not see rape as an emergency that needs to be dealt with episodic outrage. It needs systemic solutions. And
okay, let me bring in Juma on that, because there was an appalling case in 2012, we've already mentioned it, a gang rape of a 23-year-old in New Delhi. Then there were all sorts of tough new laws and harsher punishments. Is it that the law is not being properly enforced? Why are conviction rates so low, Juma?
Well, there are multiple reasons why the system is not working. And I think one of the primary impetus for a system to work is a presence of a political will to make the system work. The system is largely, it's rigged against women. And we have seen this not just in 2012, not just now. We have been seeing this for a number of years, for decades, that we have had every time there is a so-called a gruesome rape, a case like this, which kind of tends to shock public conscience, the state responds to it by giving a very easy and quick fix solution, and that is by bringing so-called harsher laws. I think we have enough laws. And I think after 2012, there was a widely consultative procedure that happened in the form of what is under the leadership of a retired Supreme Court judge, just the J.S. Verma Committee. And the Verma Committee entered into a very, very deliberative process. It consulted all stakeholders. It recommended, it submitted a big fat report, and which had a ton of really good recommendations. And it looked at the systemic failure of all our institutions, and it recommended its recommendations ranged from changing our curriculum in school to changing our institutions of the judiciary, of our police investigation, and so on, by training and so on and so forth. But if you actually look at
Ranjana, I'd like to bring in Ranjana here towards the end to look at the political dimension, because clearly a horrendous crime like this is going to become a political issue. But is this issue also being used for political ends at this point?
Yes, this is very unfortunate that, now political parties are trying to blame each other. This is rape in that particular party is ruling in that state, and this state, this is our rape, this is your state's rape. I mean, like, this is becoming a kind of, parties are using it for gaining advantage and mobilizing against the state. For example, in this case, Mamata Banerjee has been asked to resign, whereas much similar or more severe, or because I'll call it severe because they were political leaders of a particular party were involved in Unnao, in Hathras, in different states of the country, where again there was no cry for resignation and leaving, and then trying to mobilize and organize. Doctors, of course, have gone back to work now, but still you can see that a lot of hoodlums are on the street in Calcutta and trying to break public property and doing burning here and there. I think this is something very unfortunate, because women are on the one side not getting justice. 133,000 cases are pending. So in a way, delay in delivering justice is in some way doing injustice to women by the courts. Police is not writing FIR. State is not getting into the investigation. On the other side, the political players who are making obnoxious statements, even today there is a very obnoxious statement came from one of the politicians. They're helping in creating rape culture, and there is nothing which we can do in terms of stopping this political slugfest over women's rape and women's dead bodies. We don't like it. I'm an activist for a long time. We ensured that Nirbhaya got justice. Every December 16, we organized protest in Delhi. And also we were protesting till she got justice after 7 years, 3 months. So, this is what it is. There are rape cases which are coming to justice after 30 years. What does that mean? What does that mean, this system? And then on the other side, you are seeing more and more is happening. Then politicians be blaming each other. Who is accountable?
Okay.
That's our question.
Amrita, to bring our discussion to an end, this case seems to have shocked the conscience of India. How confident are you, briefly, that there could be now lasting change?
I'm not really confident at all, actually, because this is, as I said, this is just a sort of a knee-jerk reaction that we have every time a so-called gruesome or a very violent rape shocks us, and it is being used politically not only to for a party versus party, but also it calls women's ideas, or sort of calls for women's safety, have also been manipulated by politicians too, and they have been responded by violence from the state, right? I mean, it led to really harsh laws on death penalty. And we know from research that the people who are mostly sentenced to death tend to be the marginalized sections of the country. Similarly, I mean, this idea of protecting women is being used to sort of just widen the fault lines in the country. I mean, in Assam, for instance, in the middle of these protests, the chief minister of the states sort of tweeted that how he sort of patted himself on the back and said that I'm very good at settling scores when it comes to sexual violence. And a few days later, a Muslim man who had been accused of gang rape, died in police custody.
Amrita, thank you very much, and thank you to all our guests today, Ranjana Kumari, Juma Sen and Amrita Dutta, and thanks to you for watching. Remember, if you've missed any part of the show, it's always there to be viewed again whenever you want on aljazeera.com. We want your comments too. Go to Facebook. Our page is at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or on X you'll find us at AJ Inside Story. From me, James Bayes, and the team here, please keep yourself safe and healthy. I'll be back here very soon. Bye-bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.